Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and today we'll be exploring the Call of Cthulhu adventure, The Burnt Man. Written by Richard Watts, the scenario appears in the 2012 edition for the Cthulhu by Gaslight setting book. Coming in at 24 pages, including the maps and handouts, the adventure feels much longer than it really is. We completed the scenario in about 6-ish hours, and we were really taking our time with it. Instead of being set in the foggy streets of Victorian London, the adventure takes place out on the hills and moorlands of Devon, drawing some inspiration from Sherlock Holmes's Hound of the Baskervilles. The adventure is a slow burn, building the mood and atmosphere before we have a huge climax. That said, it is also a bit railroady with that climax, and keepers might want to make a few tweaks to offer a few more player options, especially for this finale. We also get a country manor house and village to explore, and a ton of NPCs to interact with, and a different type of creature than I've seen in any Call of Cthulhu scenarios before, which was a pretty nice surprise. Now, I ran this one using the 7th edition Cthulhu by Gaslight rules, and also with the Pulp Cthulhu option that it offers, which is really useful for us because we were doing a small 2-investigator session. I also did make a few tweaks to help this one flow a little bit smoother, and if I were to run this adventure again, there's a few other changes that I would employ, kind of building upon my experience of running it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. My thoughts, my criticisms, and my suggestions as a keeper who has successfully run this adventure. And I'm Jack the NPC. I'm here to give it to you from a player's side of things, as I get to leave the big city for a possibly haunted mansion out on the moors, and I get to experience the most terrifying sleigh ride of my many, many lives. But before we go any further, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. So any players in the audience, please stop here. But send your game masters this way to learn about running this adventure for you. But if you keep going and you spoil yourself, the curse will haunt your family for generations. Okay, keepers, let's get to work. But first, the backstory. Sir William Allingham, Lord of Bargrove and Squire of Bargrove Parish, was an extremely ambitious and arrogant jerk. By his 36th birthday, he'd murdered his 2 older brothers, making it look like accidents, and he'd inherited his family estates and titles. Being a man of the modern age, he set about upgrading Bargrove Hall with plumbing and gaslighting, and one of the fields on his land had several ancient standing stones, and he ordered them to remove to make more room for plowing, but his superstitious tenants refused to do that, so Sir William evicted his several tenants, then brought in men from another districts just to tear these stones down. Unfortunately, what Sir William didn't know is that those stones were sacred to the little people, the child-sized creatures who lived on these lands far longer than anyone, worshippers of Shub-Niggurath, and what many of the legends and about fairies and elves were based upon. And because Sir William's actions desecrated these stones, his life was forfeit. So, squirming up from their little caverns beneath the earth, the little people captured Sir William, re-erected the stone, bound him to it, and set him on fire. Now this was on December 8th, which brings us to the investigators. On December 14th, the player characters received this letter from a solicitor interested in hiring them. Now, one thing with the handouts, while this was a PDF that I got it from, the handouts and maps are all in black and white, like it was just printed in black and white. However, the originals can be found on the artist's website in full color, with the newspaper clippings being 2-sided, so you've got partial articles that appear on the back sides. I stuck a link down below for anyone who's wanting these prettier handouts. Anyway, so visiting his office, the lawyer tells them that he works for the recently widowed Lady Allingham of Bargrove. Now, she isn't happy with the lack of progress from the local police and wishes to hire the investigators to find her husband's killer. A murder mystery? Hell yes, it is about time. People only seem to come to me when they got ghouls and goblins. All that stuff none of those respectable agencies will touch. I am happy to know I am finally being appreciated as a real detective. The lawyer then goes on to explain the second half of the job. Lady Allingham believes that her late husband's ghost is now haunting Bargrove Hall. The investigators are asked to determine if that is true, and if so, lay Sir William's spirit to rest. Well, there it is. Well, buddy, you came to the right place, because unlike all those other real detective agencies out there, get to live in the big fancy houses and get their names in the papers and are celebrated for solving the impossible murder or recovering the crown jewels, I am the only detective with the guts and the brains to solve the unknowable. Researching the case, investigators can learn of Sir William's death and of the deaths of his older brothers a few years earlier. Now, one of those mentions a family curse, so researching the family discovers how every Bargrove male died before their 40th birthday in an unbroken pattern since 1640. Unfortunately, this information is given inside the text of the adventure, so I popped it out and just turned it into a handout that I could give to my players. Further research into this curse discovers this tale of an old Romani woman who placed a curse upon the family after that Lord Bargrove beat a Romani child to death. Now, this whole family curse is a side plot and a red herring. It gives a cool story that the player characters will likely investigate and hear rumors about during the course of the investigation, but it isn't actually important to the investigation outside of it just being flavor. Same thing with the fact that Sir William murdered his two brothers. That doesn't actually come up at any point during the course of the adventure. It's just, something that the player characters might figure out to confirm that Sir William was a total jerk. Traveling to Bargrove takes a full day, with the train arriving in Princetown. From there, they're taken by carriage and taken to Bargrove Hall. Lady Allingham explains how every night since her husband's death, strange events have occurred inside the house. Objects are rearranged, furniture moves, sometimes from room to room, weird noises like the sounds of footsteps in the darkness. No one has seen anything, and Lady Allingham believes that her husband's restless spirit is now wandering the house. The investigators are invited to stay in Bargrove Hall and may inspect every part of it. We get a huge cast of characters that we can go through. Lady Allingham, her daughter Ursula, the butler Howard, the coachman James, Ursula's tutor Josephine, a grizzled gardener, the housekeeper Miss Beddoes, as well as 10 unnamed staff members. So we have a lot of role-playing opportunity just within the house itself. Now, what's going on here is the little people are basically having a field day, exploring and knocking around inside Bargrove Hall every night. Now, there really isn't an objective to what they're doing. It's almost impossible for the player characters to see one of them, but they can hear them and see the effects of their actions. Every morning, upon seeing what weird stuff was done, requires a sanity check, or you might lose 1 point of sanity. Well, Lady Allingham automatically loses 1 point per day, meaning that she's steadily getting worse and worse as the adventure is progressing. Investigators can also visit Bargrove Village. The locals all know about the Allingham family curse, and most are pretty happy that Lord Bargrove is dead because he was, once again, a total jerk. There's also a lot of tension between the longtime locals and the workers that Lord Bargrove brought in to remove these standing stones, which, evicting some of the locals in the process and giving these houses to these kind of newcomers. Further research discovers information about the history of the region and of fairies, as well as Lord Bargrove's murder included his wrist being slashed, him being disemboweled, and then finally set on fire. Any one of those would have killed him, which may remind some history-minded investigators of the triple death performed by the Druids. However, figuring that out really doesn't give them any insight this was the little people that did it. It's just kind of an interesting factoid they can figure out. On the morning of the 19th, a band of Romani arrive and set up camp beside the Darkmare Lake. Now, I missed this little detail when I ran it, and I said that the Romani had been here for a couple weeks, which led to the players believing that they might have been involved in Lord Bargrove's death. My bad, but it does also illustrate how much this adventure really needs a visual timeline. It desperately needs one to help, keep all the different moving parts straight, because there's a lot of dates and a lot of stuff like that. It's just kind of all mixed into the text. Guys, we know that this family curse was cast by an old gypsy woman way back in the day. So what do you think that they're the ones that actually murdered Lord Bargrove? Just to keep the rumors going that this curse was even true. If that's the case, that means we could pin them not just for his murder, but possibly dozens of other murders over the centuries. I'm sure they'll get a fair trial. One optional event is a convicted murderer escaping Dartmoor prison. I didn't use this one when I ran it. It's more of a red herring or a distraction than anything else that might push the adventure forward, though keepers might want to use this as an excuse as to why the police are not available on Midwinter's Day. If someone goes off to Princetown to call the cops and they want to find these missing children, they can learn that the police are currently preoccupied with this big manhunt. So in that event, you might want to use the escaped convict, but Otherwise, it really doesn't add anything. The adventure really kicks off on the winter solstice on December 21st. Now, the first thing is it begins snowing that morning, like a whole lot of snow starts coming down. Now, thankfully, Bargrove Hall is equipped with a sleigh to hook the horses up to so the investigators can keep traveling around. Now, sometime in the afternoon, the little girl Ursula Allingham goes missing. Now, witnesses say that they saw her talking to what appeared to be a little boy near the pond, possibly one of the Romani. Meanwhile, in the village, all of the workers who helped pull down these standing stones have been brutally murdered. A stone knife was dropped at the scene. On top of that, several children are missing from the village.
Guys, I kind of feel bad saying this, but do you think that maybe the gypsies stole all those children? I mean, it is what everyone's racist grandma says they do.
Mustering their pitchforks, several of the villagers head to the Romani camp, believing them to be the kidnappers of all the children, but the Romani have also lost some of their children as well. Eventually, the sound of inhuman howls and the light of a bonfire should direct their attention to the flat-topped hill of Eagle Tor. Now, this is where we have some serious presumptions of what the characters are going to do at this point, and we start having our first really big railroad issues. The module assumes that the player characters will load up this sleigh, driven by Mackenzie the coachman and accompanied by several of the villagers and the Romani. Now, what's happening here is the little people intend to re-sanctify the land by sacrificing 6 children, burning them alive inside a giant wicker man.
Well, that is no problem at all. I mean, how many hit points could a little person possibly have? I mean, I could probably take on 3, maybe even 4 of them by myself.
The adventure doesn't say how many little people are at this, but one reference to there being 100 eyes staring at the investigators means that there is at least 50 little people here.
At least 50 of them? That gives each of us, Guys, I think there might be too many of these for us to take on.
Not wanting to be disturbed, the little people have enchanted some of the trees along the slope of Eagle Tor. Now, for my game, the player characters had already investigated that hill earlier in the adventure, actually earlier in that same day, so I had them notice how many of the branches on these trees had been cut as the little people were gathering all the wood to build their wicker man with, so the investigators could see that there was a lot of freshly cut branches. So when the player characters were climbing up this hill in order to stop the ceremony, they noticed that the trees along the slope were a lot thicker than they had been before, and some of them weren't in the same place because they could recognize some of the trees that had their branches cut. They could figure out that those weren't where those trees were before, which kind of gave them a slight hint and advantage to spotting that something was wrong before the trees attacked. These attacking trees kill several of the people while others flee, leaving only 2 to 7 NPCs plus Mackenzie, who's protected by plot armor because he's the best at driving the sleigh for the big escape scene. Reaching the top of the hill, they see the little people performing a summoning and the children screaming inside this giant wicker man. The summoning is for a dark young, and while the module says that it coalesces out of the woods on the far side of the clearing, I had it slowly forming out of the bonfire's smoke, allowing the player characters to kind of see this twisted shape kind of forming and growing before them, and they knew that something was being summoned here. Now, attacking the little people only allows for a 50% chance of stopping this summoning, and the best, really the only way of freeing the children is just to knock the wicker man over. The adventure requires a jump roll to leap over the flames and crash into the wicker man, spilling it open and freeing the children. When I ran this, I gave a few alternatives to this. If they wanted to run around the fire, I allowed a dex check, and failure on that dex check, the investigator was open to 1 or 2 attacks from different little people as they were kind of like racing through this crowd. I also allowed a strength check to bring it down, as well as physically attacking the legs of the wicker man, though they still want to do something to direct its fall, otherwise it might just fall into the big bonfire. But there were a couple ways that I allowed versus just leaping over the bonfire and into the wicker man, because players are going to come up with something different than what it's wanting them to do. But once the wicker man falls, it spills open, the children are free, and now we can have our daring escape. The module has this, that everyone piles inside the sleigh as hordes of little people and this dark young are chasing them across the snowy moors until we get close enough to the lights of the village that the little people just back off. Now Mackenzie, having a 65% driving sleigh skill, must make 3 successful rolls. Personally, I think if we're doing this one with 7th edition rules, we do this as a carriage chase scene, while having the NPC do all the driving allows for armed investigators to be shooting behind them as they're going across these frozen moors. explorers, but keepers might want to consider that having the player characters take the reins, such as Mackenzie being too shaken to drive, like he looks over his shoulder and kind of goes temporarily insane, seeing all these, the little people in the dark young following them, or maybe the investigators didn't even bring Mackenzie with them, because it's kind of assuming that they're going to be bringing him along in order to drive this sleigh. So, maybe they can have it where they do the entire chase scene doing the driving, or maybe they do it where they do the second half of the chase scene doing the driving because Mackenzie goes out. This all really just depends on the makeup of your group and how skilled they are, but keepers keep that in mind. Now, once they're back in town, the adventure is done. Any player characters who talk to the old Romani woman and request that they remove it will remove the curse from the Allingham family line, and that is it.
That's it? I mean, the little people are just defeated forever like that? I mean, what's to stop them from coming back next year, or maybe during the summer solstice, or one of the equinoxes? I guess that's somebody else's problem.
Overall, The Burnt Man is an okay adventure. It's not great, and the best stuff about it are mostly the things that are around the adventure than the actual adventure itself. We have this huge cast of NPCs, and some of them are very detailed, like these three, for example. None of them are bad. All of them are interesting, but we could also remove them from the adventure without anyone even noticing, and many other NPCs here fall into this same category. They're more padding than meat to the word count, making the scenario feel like there's just a lot more to it than there really is. I like the fact that we have little people as the enemies and how they relate to the lore of fairies. I haven't seen this being used before. However, discovering that these things gave rise to the fairy lore doesn't really give the players any advantage when they're dealing with the little people later on. I think it'd be really cool if when they're researching it, they discovered a weakness that they could then use against the little people during the final confrontation.
Something like iron could be used as special weapons against them. Then again, iron is already pretty well known to be something that elves have a weakness against, so maybe do it as a different metal, right? Like bronze or pewter or something like that, right? Or maybe they could find out about some sort of specific herb or spice that the little people might be allergic to. And Lady Allingham, maybe she's got a little bit of that stuff hidden away in a spice cabinet. And maybe the Romani, maybe they got a lot more of that stuff with them. So if the player characters do their research and they learn about this specific spice, and they go to the gypsies and they get it, and they bring that with them to that big final ceremony at the end, they can then throw that little baggie of paprika, whatever it is, into that bonfire and turn that thing into a tear gas grenade.
While I already mentioned earlier how this scenario desperately needs a timeline of events just written out, another issue that I had with it was the timing of the adventure itself. The climax occurs on the equinox on the 21st. The player character should arrive on the 16th. However, with advanced groups, it does suggest that they can arrive a little bit later, such as the 18th or thereabouts, and I 100% agree with this. I ran this adventure with 2 players, and they pretty much hit everything within 3 days, so I ended up moving the solstice kind of quietly from the 21st to the 20th. So even with 2 veteran Call of Cthulhu players, we should have started this out on the evening of the 18th rather than the 16th. So just to keep everything moving and at a good pace, that way they've always got new things to explore and investigate and aren't just kind of scratching their heads saying, what else is there to do? Because they're waiting for the climax to happen, because the investigators really can't push the narrative forward if they figure it out very early. So it's best to give them a much smaller window in order to do all the investigation. That way they always feel that they've got more stuff they could be doing. You can pick up The Old Cthulhu by Gaslight as a PDF on DriveThruRPG, link below. It's an interesting adventure with some good potential, but with a little work, this could become a great adventure.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews, RPG philosophy, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, investigators, you have a great day. The big thing about this adventure that really disappointed me is that it advertised itself as being based off of Hound of the Baskervilles, which to me says there's going to be a dog in it. So I go out to the moorlands with a pockets full of milk bones, and there were no doggos anywhere to be found. Just a bunch of freaking murder midgets. I just want to pet a dog, man.